Welcome back to Productivity Mastery, the podcast that's bringing some of the most inspiring leaders from all across the globe, people who been there, done that. And I couldn't be more excited to welcome my guest today after a short summer holiday, a few weeks without the podcast. But now the wait was worth because I'm here with Jon Rennie. Is that how I pronounce it, John?
Yeah, that's it.
There
Yeah.
you go. John is the co-founder and president and CEO of Peak Demand Inc., a premier manufacturer of critical components for electrical utilities, a real business, a real successful business. He's also a former U.S. Navy nuclear submarine officer who made 7 deployments during the end of the Cold War. Prior to starting Peak Demand, John led 8 manufacturing businesses for 3 global companies, a lot of leadership experience. He's also the author of 3 best-selling leadership books. I have the watch, all in the same boat, and you have the watch. He hosts the popular Deep Leadership podcast. I had a bunch of conversations with him, and I'm learning something new every time I talk to him. I listen to his one of his books, all in the same boat, and it's filled with everybody needs to get this book. It's filled with great leadership advice, practical advice coming from his experience being a nuclear submariner. And I'm honored to welcome Jon Rennie.
It's great to be here. I'm really excited. I had you on my show just a little bit ago, and that'll run this weekend. I really enjoyed getting to meet you, and we talked about your book. And so now I guess I'm here, and we get to switch roles. So I get to be the interviewee this time, and I love it.
I love that, man. I love these podcast swaps. I think it was Patrick Flessner, another guest on the podcast, who made the initial introduction. I'm very grateful, Patrick, if you're listening. Another guy who has a couple of great books. So let's give
Yes,
him a bit of a
yes.
credit. The Leadership House and Fast Scaling. But not to confuse the books. Let's focus now on Jon Rennie here today. John, let's start from the beginning. How does one become a nuclear submariner? What was your thoughts? What was the motivation for you to decide to take such an unconventional role?
Hmm. It's interesting because, you talk to a lot of people and they had, childhood dreams of what they wanted to do when they grew up. And a lot of people, a lot of children have these dreams of being an astronaut or being a firefighter or a police officer or whatever strikes their fancy. But most people don't ever do that. I mean, most people, those things change and they end up being an accountant or something different from what their dreams were. And for me, though, I had two grandfathers that were in World War II, one in the Army, one in the Navy. And I grew up hearing their stories and their adventures from the things that they did throughout their life. And we were all from a small town in New England, the northeast of the United States. And people in my town, it was blue collar town, and nobody really went anywhere and did anything. You were born there, you worked there, you died there, and that's pretty much what you do. My parents were born in the same town as I was born. My grandparents were born in the same town. But then I remember my grandfathers always had these stories of adventures and the things that they did, and I said to myself that's something that I was interested in doing. And the more and more I read, about studying World War II, and I was always interested in it as a kid. But the submarines, what they did during World War II, especially the U.S. Navy after Pearl Harbor, we had a lot of our Navy was destroyed, and the submarine force kind of held the line until we could get back on our feet again. And these exploits of these heroic submarine captains and crews just always resonated with me. I just always thought it was fascinating. It was sort of, like outer space and astronauts, just you're in this vessel, everything around you wants to kill you, and you're out there in space, right? And you have to survive. And I always thought that underwater, warfare was like that. You're in this very inhospitable environment, but yet you have this mission to accomplish. So early on, even before I got into high school, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be a submarine officer. I want to serve on submarines. And so then it's, a long process to figure out how do you get the grades? How do you get, because, I remember going to my guidance counselor in high school, and I said, I want to be a nuclear submarine officer. And they said, okay, and you're the first person that ever said that. But to his credit, he did the research and found out what it would take to do that. And he said, you got to be really good in math and science. You got to go to engineering school. And, because you have to be a nuclear engineer essentially to get into this role. And I didn't know what an engineer was. I didn't know, I wasn't really strong in math and science at the time, but that's what I had to do. I had to do all this work to get into a good school, and then eventually get into I had to get a military scholarship to college. And then eventually you have to go, like your junior year in college, you go to Washington, D.C. and you interview to get accepted into the submarine program. And you have to go meet with an admiral, and you're just this junior guy, and you have to meet with an admiral, and you have to go through an interview process. But in the end, I got in. And then you went through a long process of being trained to be a submariner, but eventually I reached my dream, which was to get on to the USS Tennessee. And I served for 5 years as a naval officer, did a bunch of different things, deployed 7 times, just really enjoyed every aspect of it. So, but yeah, it was a childhood dream that came to fruition through really hard work, perseverance, and just having, as Angela Duckworth calls, grit. I needed grit to be able to. I had a passion for a long-term dream that I had, and so just passion and perseverance got me to that point where I was able to achieve that childhood dream.
And just for having a bit of a context, when did that happen, and how old were you at the time?
Oh, I was probably, 12, 13 years old. Yeah, it took a long time too. I mean, to realize that dream was over 10 years of work to get there. And so I think a lot of times we want instant gratification in life, but some of the hardest things we ever achieve in terms of success come from decades of work. And that was an example of it, where it took me almost 10 years to go from this is what I want to do to actually doing it.
This is what we spoke about at the other podcast as well, that success takes time, and it's usually consistency, it's usually persistence, grit, and all these kind of success stories that we keep reading about. It's not that they're not true, but we kind of like to feature only part of the story, and sometimes paint a very twisted picture of what it really takes to achieve your dream. And hopefully we can inspire more people, especially younger generation people coming into the world of work these days, that they need to arm themselves with patience and to let go of this urge for perfectionism, that I don't know, the next job needs to be a perfect job, and things need to happen for me. I need to build this unicorn company in 2 years. It's like, just the odds are so small. So tell me, when was that? Like, which year did that happen when you ended up actually getting the role?
So I was commissioned as a naval officer in 1989, and then served for 5 years. I got out in 1994. So those are my 5 years. So it was sort of got to see the end of the Cold War happen. We went from, the Atlantic Ocean was filled with Soviet ships and submarines, and by the end there was nothing. And so it was just an interesting time to be there, to see that transition. And so part of me at that point in 1994, the Cold War sort of was over. I really was questioning, what am I doing? I had spent at that point 2 solid years of my life under the ocean, and in that 5 years, and I was questioning, like, what's next, and so because it really didn't seem like the mission had changed, obviously, and with the Cold War sort of ending, and that's when I decided to leave in '94, and kind of went off and then into the corporate world at that point.
I just wanna dive into your years as a nuclear submariner, and especially the beginnings. What was it like, you getting on board for the first time and getting a feel of the submarine? How was your feeling? Did you have any fears? Like, if if you remember. Of course, it's been quite some time ago.
Oh yeah, of course I do, because it was very much it's burned in my memory because it was such an experience. You train. So I was in what they call ROTC through college. It was called Reserve Officer Training Course. So I was going to I went to Worcester Polytech, which is an engineering school, and I had a military scholarship, 4-year scholarship. But I also had to go to military classes in this. So I was studying, everything about the Navy in school for 4 years, learning leadership and naval architecture and history and all this. And then once I got my commission, then I spent another year and 3 months in training. So I had to go to a place called Nuclear Power School, which is really difficult, for 6 months. And then I had to go to what's called prototype, where you're actually operating a land-based nuclear reactor for 6 months. And then you go to submarine school, and then they send you to the fleet. So the Navy says, you're ready to go to the fleet. And so I got my orders to go to the USS Tennessee. And I remember we were getting ready for deployment. And so I had to fly down. I took a taxi from the airport to the Navy base. And I showed up I was in my uniform, and I had my sea bag because I knew we were being deployed. So I had my sea bag with everything I needed for the next 3 months on my shoulder. And the USS Tennessee was in dry dock. So it was still finishing up repairs, getting ready to go to sea. And so I came into this covered dry dock, very large building, if you can imagine. And there's an Ohio class submarine out of the water. And then, instantly you come in, and there's noise everywhere. So there's drills and hammers, there's welding sparks. You're hearing all this noise, people yelling, horns going off. And so there's all this, like, it's just an emotion. There's so much, it's like sensory overload when you walk around the corner and then you see this massive submarine out of the water. And I thought to myself, I really thought I was ready for this. I had gone through really essentially 5.5 years of training to get to this day. And when I got there, I realized, holy cow, I'm not ready for this. This is really difficult. This is really complex. This is really dangerous. And you start having these self-doubts, like, am I ready for this? Are they really going to let me be an officer? On a nuclear submarine, there's a crew of 155, and of that, 140 are sailors, and there's only 15 officers. And I was going to be one of those 15 officers on board. And I really was questioning whether or not, I was ready for that. And I think young leaders get promoted into their first management role, right? And they're just like that, like, I'm ready. And then you get there, you're like, I'm not ready. So it was one of those things, like, I was not ready for just the size, the scope, the complexity, the danger. It was just more than I really had imagined when you physically see it. So it was definitely overwhelming. And then what was interesting, I had an officer greet me. He told me where my rack was, my bed. I threw my sea bag on my bed, and they said, we're going to take you to the engine room. You're going to meet your team. And I was the new reactor controls officer. So I was responsible for all the guys maintaining all of the electronic equipment around the reactor. And so I met my team for the first time. And what I learned is that every one of the sailors had made, multiple deployments. They were highly experienced, very talented. They were led by a senior enlisted chief petty officer that had been in the Navy as many years as I've been alive. And I was their boss. And so I was this young kid. And again, that's another situation that oftentimes leaders find themselves. They might show up and they're the manager, but they may not be the oldest or the most experienced person in the room. So at that point, you have to say, oh, how am I going to add value to this team, not being the oldest and not being the most experienced? So that was my first chance to really learn leadership, especially as a young, inexperienced person being handed a team of highly capable, trained people doing a very dangerous thing. And we're talking about operating a nuclear reactor at sea, which is, somewhat dangerous, if you will. But I mean, the point is that I think that was a really good training ground for me to learn leadership. And so, and you come in as from the bottom and you work your way up. You have to learn everything, and it's not an easy process. But I think that really set a foundation for me for the rest of my career, for sure.
And you have done many different things. First of all, as a submariner, but then afterwards in the industry, you're an entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur. What would be your advice in such a situation to maybe somebody in such a position that get promoted as a manager or get hired as a manager, and they need to all of a sudden manage a lot more capable and experienced people? What were some of your reflections and learnings that you can maybe share with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I talk to a lot of college students, and especially I talk to grad students, MBA students a lot. And that's one of we talk about this in that training program, because I think that's a big issue for them, because a lot of people come out, a lot of people, young men and women come out of a business school and end up in a management role, and they're in that same exact position. They're the youngest, least experienced, and then suddenly they're in charge. So I think that's where there's a couple of things that help you be successful. One is listen. I mean, that's a really big part, is spend a lot of time listening to the team, asking questions, especially open-ended questions. Spend a lot of physical time with your team, observing what the personalities of the people, the work that they do, the challenges that they have. And so a lot of this is really showing respect for those experienced professionals that you now have the opportunity to lead. So you do that through engaging them in good dialogue, good questions, listening, active listening. And the other second thing I would say is then you learn. You need to learn as quickly as you can. You cannot be a liability for that team. So if you're doing something that's really difficult, and so maybe there's a standard that this team always have to maintain, you better read that standard cover to cover, and you better understand it, because you need to not be a liability for that team. So we in the Navy, we had an expression: if you were not qualified for submarine operations, you were called a nub. And a nub is a non-useful body. And you don't want to be a non-useful body on a submarine. And so what I encourage young leaders do, is don't be a nub. Be competent in your craft. So if you are not competent, get competent. That means you're going to spend a lot of extra time reading and getting up to speed, so that your team sees that you're working hard to learn your craft and to be capable, so you're not a liability. And then I would say the third thing is this, and it's really essential, is that there are certain things that only the leader can do, and you need to do those things. And so, for example, I was a young leader, right? And I didn't know the ship like they knew it. I didn't know the systems like they did, but I needed to make sure that they were taken care of, that my bosses knew that the needs of my team, whether it's parts, whether it's time off, whether it's maybe they having a pay issue that I need to resolve. I took care of my team, and only the leader can do that. So do the things that only a leader can do, and then work your butt off to learn your craft. And then I would say be really respectful and listen and learn from your experienced professionals. If you do that, I think you're going to get a lot. They're going to learn to respect you. You're going to gain respect by those things. And the thing is, you can't come in and demand respect. And I saw a lot of that with some officers would come on board and they would say, I'm the officer, I'm in charge. And when you do that, you're not in charge. They were not going to listen to you. So, but if you are respectful and you really do defer to their expertise, you learn really fast, and you do your job well, then I think you're going to earn that respect over time.
And this is such an important piece, earning the respect. I want to dive deeper into that. What else would you recommend in terms of earning trust and respect as a leader? What would be some reflections, maybe some unsexy ideas that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, because as I mentioned earlier, these 5 years I spent underwater, on a submarine, really, gave me a good firm foundation for all the things I did in the rest of my career. But one of the things that really stood out for me is that on a submarine at sea, we spend long hours on watch, working with these with the people that work for us, right? So we stand watch. We really get to know each other. So, for example, one of the duty stations is engineering officer of the watch, and so I would stand watch with 4 other operators, and we would operate the reactor for 6 hours at a time, and we do this every day for 110 days. Well, guess what? I knew everything about my people, and they knew everything about me, right? So we had deep, intimate knowledge of each other. We were very familiar with each other. So when it came time to lead them, I knew their quirks, I knew their hangups, I knew what bothered them. I knew, their pet peeves and what have you. So I was able to customize my approach to each individual that worked for me because I really knew them. And so when I came into the corporate world, I spent 22 years working in the corporate world. I realized that was sort of like a secret superpower that nobody had. Like, I noticed that the other managers didn't get to know their team, and didn't let them get to know them. They were the guy in the corner office, and they were, I'm in charge, and I got a fancy title. And I was just the opposite. I spent time on the shop floor. I every day I'd walk around, I'd talk to people, get to know them, let them get to know me. And I think that really establishing those relationships and really helped build this two-way communication between my team members, such that they knew me, they knew they could trust me, they knew who I was. And one of the things that's interesting, if you do that over time, even if you screw up, which you will do as a leader, you get a little bit of grace because they know you and they trust you, and you've been a person of your word for month after month and year after year. And so when you do screw up, they give you a little bit of grace. And I noticed that some managers who are let's just say, for the nice, they're jerks, right? And they think that they're all that. They're very high ego managers that want to be addressed in certain ways, and they're above their people. When they screw up, it's a big laugh fest. Everybody laughs when those kind of bosses screw up, because nobody has their back, because they haven't built that rapport. So, spending all those hours, with my people under the ocean, that to me was like, that's normal. That's the way a leader needs to lead. And I think that's just a normal approach. I'll give you an example. So my first factory I ran, I was 32 years old, and I would do this thing called Fridays on the floor. So every Friday I would work from the morning, 8 a.m. till noon. I would work on the shop floor in a different area of the factory. So every month I would work. So this was the first Friday of every month. Every month I would go different place on the shop floor. And I would spend time learning the process, meeting with the team, and just doing the work that they do. And I learned so much about the challenges and problems that we had on the shop floor. But I also got to know my team, and they got to know me. But one of the things that's interesting is I started sharing this with my management team. I'm like, you guys wouldn't believe this, but the procedures are all messed up over here. They don't have the right tools over here. This guy is always working overtime because he's not getting because we're not getting the materials quick enough to him in the day. I basically discovered all these secret problems that we had in our factory, the hidden factory sometimes it's called, and my team didn't get it. My management team were like, we don't understand it. We don't get it. And I was like, all right, here's the deal. We're doing Fridays on the floor instead of just me we're all going. So we started doing with the entire management team, going out first Friday of every month, going out there. And then we would come back to the conference room and we'd talk about what we learned. And it was incredible what everybody was just, the excitement level increased, the passion towards trying to fix problems on the shop floor. And it really, the relationships built between us as a management team, but also between the management team and the workers. They saw that the management team cared and they were spending physical time there. And then the other thing is we kept an action list of the things that we said had to be done, and we were getting those things done. Every month we review, where do we go? And so the shop floor employees saw that suddenly management cared. Suddenly they're present. Suddenly they're fixing long-standing problems. And guess what? all the things that you measure in a factory got better. So our productivity increased, our overtime went down, our output went way up, our profit levels got to we got record levels of performance, and then we ended up getting more and more sales because of it, because we were performing, like on-time delivery was very, very high, and so we got more orders. So this business just took off, it exploded. And so, it was just interesting through just engaging with employees and learning from employees and listening to employees. We were able to just turn that business into a profit machine. And I remember too, because a lot of people in corporate were trying to figure out what we did. Like, what's your secret? And I really struggled. I had no idea what my secret was. I said, I remember saying, I don't know. I mean, I said, it's not me, it's the people. They get it, and they're working hard to fix it. But it really was about being present and just almost like that, back to the submarine, spending time with your people, getting to know them, getting to know where their issues are, and leading each people individually. And I think that really stood out as the secret, if it was a secret. But it was just getting people engaged and really, I think we struggle with engagement in most companies today. And I think especially now, even with remote work, it's probably engagement level is probably dropping. I haven't seen the latest, but I think a lot of times people are not engaged at work because their management is not engaged. They don't even know who their managers are. They're in some fancy corner office someplace, and they're busy all the time, and they never see them. So they just, they clock in, they do their jobs, and they go home. So I think that being present and really engaging with employees is a great way to get some amazing performance, and it's not rocket science.
I was literally getting goosebumps when you shared the strategy, the practice that you had, and as you said, bringing people together, caring for people, showing up, and doing what you commit to do, but showing that you care. We had the former president of Starbucks, Howard Behar, exceptional leader. He was a guest on a podcast twice, and he shared this story, which is kind of connected, where I think he retired at some point, and a couple of years later they had to bring him back. Because the culture was suffering, and he was trying to figure out what to do. So he came up with this plan. He went to every department and said, I need you guys to figure out how your department is going to make this amount of money to create value for the company. I don't remember the exact number, but it was quite a stretch goal. And people were complaining, and people were like, yeah, but what is this? But he had this intention in mind. I want them to have a villain. I want to be the villain. It's okay. But I want to get them to work hard and go through challenges together, so they can come together, and the culture is no longer about me, it's about we. So he set them up. It was not about the money. He didn't care about the numbers. He cared about bringing back this culture of collaboration and trust and care, and it worked. At the end of the day, it worked. I don't know if all departments managed to achieve the goals, but it's not the point. The point was they found a way to go together because they were going through challenges, and they built this trust. And I actually wonder if you ever intentionally set your people up for, sort of like some challenging goals or some like difficulties with the purpose for them to come closer together.
Well, it's interesting. I tell a story in my second book because it really resonated with me in terms of a leader that did that too. Now, I didn't do it, but I learned a lesson from another leader that I put in my toolbox, and it's exactly that. So we had I was running a business that was very successful, a different business than the one I was just talking about, very successful. We had about 60 to 70% market share. So in this particular product, we were killing it. We had grown the business, more than doubled the business since I'd been there. So we were killing it. Life was good. I was fat, dumb, and happy. And we had a new boss show up. So came from the competition, and he didn't even spend any time learning about my business. He called me down to headquarters. He said, you need to fly down to headquarters to meet. And I thought, that's kind of weird. Usually a boss flies into the factory and gets to meet, the team and everything. But he's like, wanted me personally to fly down. And so I flew down. He wanted me to present the business. I presented the business, showed him the growth, all the great stories I had, the customer feedback. I mean, I was killing it. I was a very successful leader, and I shared all that with him. And he said, this is no good. He said, what can you do to double your business? I go, what? He said, what can you do to double your business? I said, we have 70% market share. There's no doubling of the business. This is who we are. Maybe we can grow another 10%, because I think my growth plan was like about 10% growth. And he said, I want you to come back in a month with a plan to double your business. And I thought, what a jerk. I mean, I am the top guy in this company. I have proven that I know what the hell I'm doing. And you're telling me I got to double my business. And I remember taking that back to our team and saying that, well, we got to come up with a plan to double the business. And they all reacted the same way I did. That jerk. What do you think? He didn't even know our business. He hadn't even showed up here. We're amazing. We know exactly what we're doing. And then, we spent a lot of time being mad. And then we spend some time thinking about, well, how could we do it? I mean, is it possible with your 70% market share? How do you grow? And then our marketing manager, I remember he said, he goes, maybe we're thinking about the business differently. He said, we're thinking about this product line, and that's the way we're very successful in it. But there's a lot of other product lines that are very similar that do the same thing. Instead of being in this business, maybe we're in this business, this bigger, broader business. And that's when the light bulb went off. We're like, and they said, well, how big is that market? And then how much is our market share? Well, when we did that, we were like 10% market share when we looked at the broader business overall. And we were like, oh, that sucks. And it was like, we put together a plan to move into this adjacent business, which was called sensors. So we put together a business plan to develop a line of sensors that would do similar to what our current product did, but and it was actually an emerging market, and it gave us the opportunity to grow without, we weren't capped with market size, right? There was a big growth potential. So we put together a plan. We presented to the new boss. He's like, do it. What do you need for money? And he gave us the funding to do it. And we did it. We doubled that friggin' business. And the thing is, it took us a while. I mean, it took us 4 years to do it, 5 years. But the thing is, I don't think he really knew there was a way to double the business. I think he didn't, and he didn't have an answer to how to do it. What he did was he challenged us to come up with a plan, and he made us think differently about our business. And so sometimes as leaders, we've got to challenge our teams, even if we think in our minds, we're like, this is a dumb ask, but how do you double your business? How do you get, so especially the people that think they're very successful, how do you challenge them to do something they don't really believe in? And I tell you what, that boss, I still think is one of the most remarkable ways that he led the business, because I really got pissed off when I really was offended that he asked me to double the business. But we ended up doing it, and he supported us through that. And so I think it was a brilliant move by a leader.
What an amazing move, man. What an amazing move. I mean, he did not tell you, here's a strategy, go implement. He went and he asked you a great question, a question that will expand your perspective. And once you and the rest of the team came up with it, instead of him pushing you this strategy, you came up with it. Maybe he wasn't sure if it's going to work, but he knew that you're going to put all your heart in it, and you're going to learn, and you're probably going to pivot. But what a great leadership move, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
It was funny because when I started that business, it was like a $35 million business. And then when I left, we were 140 million. That's what he led us to. And I had grown it up to a certain point, just sort of organically, but he got me thinking differently to take it to the next level. So I think that's a great story. And again, sometimes leaders don't have to have all the answers, but they have to have great questions. And I think great questions can lead to really interesting results.
And I love the fact that, I mean, again, we're so often as leaders, we just want to take control and lead and show the direction and have the team go with us. But there's so much opportunity when you ask the question and you get your people to lead, and
Yeah.
you're just
Yeah.
more like on the sideline, just kind of guiding them and supporting them, but they're the ones that make the choices. They make their own mistakes and they grow and learn. And of course, sometimes short term, that you're like, oh, I can do it better, I can see it, I don't have time. But uh, but when you invest in your people, they grow as leaders, and they see things that you don't see. They
Yeah.
see it from
Yeah.
a different angle.
Yeah. I really like, and again, the idea of just as a manager, like being in that room with my team, I remember saying, we got to have a plan. We have to, how do we double the business? And just being quiet enough to hear the marketing manager just go, I think I have an idea. And you're just like, and as a leader, you can't stomp on that. You're like, okay, let's hear it. And when he said it, as soon as he said it, we all went, oh yeah, that's it. And so I think we have to be quiet enough to allow our people to surprise us, with things that we never even considered. And I think that that's my hat's off to that guy that just sort of said, hey, what about this? And I think that, and me being the leader saying yes, and then me presenting it to my bosses and said, here it is. And you think about that person, right? That marketing manager came up with the idea. He's like, holy cow, my boss backed me, his boss backed me, and now we're doing the plan that I kind of came up with. Think about how valuable they feel, how proud they are. They go home and tell their wives and their kids, and, like, look what I did, and so it's their idea comes to life. It's not my idea. So I think it's really brilliant.
I listened to your book, and by the way, everybody needs to get a copy of Joe's books. Specifically, I listened to All in the Same Boat,
Mm,
and I have a few notes, and I just want you to comment on
sure,
them.
sure.
I just had some notes, so you have to kind of elaborate. But I wrote down something that you were sharing as learning, which was the questions: what's going well, what's going
Mm.
wrong, and if you were in my shoes, what would you change first?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, this is something I do when I take over a new business, and I haven't done it in a while. I've been running my business for 7 years now, but when I was with corporate, I was the guy who turned around businesses. So they would always send me to like the struggling business, and so I'd show up but that's one of the things I did is meet with as many people as possible, and I would ask those 3 questions. What's going well? What's not working well here? And if you're in my shoes, what would you do first? What are the first thing you would do? And what I would do is take really good notes. And what I found was there was always like um, everything would coalesce around 2 or 3 different ideas. And so it was pretty easy. It was basically the people telling me what needs to happen, even though I was brand new as a leader. And so, in those early days when I'm still getting to know the people, I would implement some of those ideas from the group. So as I have an opportunity to meet with everybody, review all the notes, there might be 2 or 3 things that I can easily attack. And one of the things that's interesting is that it sends the message that there's a new boss. Number one. Number two is he or she is listening, and number three is he or she is taking action on the things that we're worried about. And I think when you do that early on, it's a great way to show that you care and that you're listening and that you're going to be an engaging manager. So just a simple thing I do. I really teach, especially as a new leader. Coming into even if you're an experienced leader coming into a new organization, it's a great set of tools, just 3 questions, and you really learn a lot, and it helps you engage. It's almost like what consultants do. It's funny because it's probably like what consultants do. They show up and say, what's working, what's not working, what would you fix? And then they make the list of action items, they give it to management, and they get $1 million. Well, you don't need that. You don't need a consultant if you do this kind of effort yourself. You actually ask the people. And I think it's one way to learn really quickly about what to do in those early days.
And I would assume that's also something you recommend to leaders, not necessarily new leaders, but people who are managing people, entrepreneurs, if they haven't done anything like that because we are so busy running the business, right? Would that be
Yeah,
something you
yeah,
recommend to people as well, to make their one-on-ones maybe more frequent, or
yeah,
just random
yeah.
conversations? And would you recommend that as well?
Yeah, it's a great time to do resets. I think This might sound weird, but I found myself, especially as running my own business, is that every once in a while I got to fire myself. I got to get rid of myself. I got to get rid of the way I'm thinking about the business. And I think that we need to do this often. And one way we can fire ourselves is to have those discussions, those deep discussions with our employees. Ask those three questions, right? What's so you might think you're killing it, right? And but when you ask those questions with your team, maybe you do it once a year with every one of your employees, and you start seeing all this, like, oh crap, I'm not really doing a good job. I stopped having stand-up meetings. I'm not connecting with customers like I used to. I'm not communicating well, and so you learn some things about yourself and your leadership style through those three questions that you can again fire. And you can even say, look, guys, I've screwed up, and I've made some mistakes. I've got tunnel vision in this area, and I'm firing myself effective today, and you're getting a new boss, and it's me, and I'm going to learn the things that I just learned from you guys, and I'm going to get better. And I think that's I think people like to hear that you're listening, and you're reflecting on your leadership style, and you're working to get better. I mean, it's you know if you've been in leadership, I've been leading people for more than 30 years, and one of the things I've learned is it's a continuous process. It's always about continuous improvement. How can I become better in the job that I'm doing?
You talk about vulnerability, as I understand as well, how important it is in leadership. I wonder what's military, what's the Navy take on vulnerability, and where is how do we find the right balance between showing up and being upfront, being honest, sharing how you feel and our doubts, but also not freaking people out, because what if somebody thinks our leader cannot get it done? I can't trust this guy because how do we find the right balance so we're vulnerable, but it comes from a place of strength?
Yeah, no, great question. I think, what we were talking about earlier is you got to be really competent in your job. Competency is really important. So be really skilled in your craft. So like I'm in the electrical products market, right? So I am an expert in this market. And I don't say that lightly. I've been doing it for a long time. I go to conferences on a regular basis, and I speak and teach on very technical topics every month, right? I'm considered an industry expert. So I am a master at my craft, right? So you have to be one end really good, and then you have to be on the other side really humble and realize that you recognize you don't know everything. And so what does that mean? Well, you're working with your team, right? And something comes up that maybe it's an accounting issue. You're like, oh, I'm a master at this, but I may not be an expert in accounting. And so that's when you're going to say, look, I have an idea of what this is, but you're the expert. Tell me, I really need you to look at this and give me your feedback. So, admitting that you're not an expert in everything, and I don't think you can be an expert in everything. As a general manager, you're dealing with HR issues, you're dealing with finance issues, accounting issues, market issues, product issues, quality issues. You may not be an expert in all that. So engage with your experts and say, look, I don't know this. You're an expert in this area. Teach me, show me, help me understand this better. And that's where you're being vulnerable. Where the people that are not vulnerable, they're saying, oh, I got this. I'll take care of this. I know this. I understand this. And they're being fake, right? And I think people see through fake really easily. And I think we cannot be, as leaders, we can't be fake. We have to be genuine. And if we don't know something, we just say, I don't know it. Help me understand this. But you better be competent in your craft. If you say I don't know it all the time, then people are like, why are we following this guy? Right? So you gotta be an expert in what you're doing. You gotta be getting better every day. But it's okay to say you don't know something, for sure.
And it's also about how you show up.
Yeah,
How's your mental state? What's the energy that you're bringing when you deliver bad news, and when you are sharing, hey guys, I might need your help because this is something I'm not an expert in, as opposed to, oh my God, we're gonna die.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
really
I think
depends on how.
I think it's really interesting. Maybe that's a Navy side of me too, but we were always in, you know, here's the deal. When things got really crappy, right? Maybe the weather was rough or something bad was happening with the bad guys. I noticed one thing right away. Everybody looked to the captain. Was the captain calm? Did he look like he knew what he was doing? And or is he panicking? And I'll tell you this, my captains never panic. They cool, calm, collected, plan, execute, let's do it. And I think that is what people look for when things get ugly. Is they want to see that the boss isn't panicking. Now you can be panicking inside, but I think you got to keep it calm for the people around you. I mean, I know when the pandemic hit, there was a lot of unknowns. We didn't even know if we could continue our manufacturing operations. And so I remember just talking to the team, look, I don't know what this means. I said, but I will let you know as soon as possible. For right now, we're going to continue to operate until otherwise told, and we're going to keep doing what we've always done. And I think just keeping everybody calm, even when you don't know, when there's a lot of uncertainty around, I think that's a good way to lead. But if you panic, they panic. So it's not good to panic. For sure.
You probably have a lot of conversation with your captain. I just want to, if you ever talk about it with him, um, how did he manage to do that? And I'm talking about the. And if you don't know about your captain, maybe talk about your own experience. But what would be some practical, sort of like nitty gritty advice on how do you remain calm in the midst of a storm and everything is burning and you know that, but you gotta be calm because
Yeah.
you have to lead your team. So do you have any lessons that you learned from the captain, or maybe from your own experience that you can share?
Well, I think probably where it's most important to recognize this is at least for me, at least, has been my time as an entrepreneur. That's really where I found myself more needing these skills, because it seemed like when I was with a big company, things go bad, but there's a big company behind me and there's cash, and so we'll figure it out, right? But when you're an entrepreneur and you're it, right? That's when it gets really scary. Like there's no one backing you up. You're out there alone. And so I talk about the idea of you have to have a foot in two canoes. I don't know if that translates well, but two different, like maybe kayaks or canoes, right? And so your one foot is in the being realistic with what's happening around and being honest with yourself with, okay, this is not good. This situation is challenging. And so being 100% realistic with the current situation your company faces in one canoe. And the other canoe is this unwavering feeling that you're going to succeed no matter what. And so keeping that focus with the team and the people we're going to succeed no matter what. Yes, there's a challenge. Yes, I'm going to be real with that. So you can't be like, oh, it's not a problem that we don't have cash this month. That is a problem. That's a big problem. But you also have to have this idea that you are going to figure it out and you're going to move forward. So it's having the foot in two canoes is a really important skill as an entrepreneur, to be realistic with the present and then always having this unwavering vision for the future. And I think the unwavering vision is the thing that keeps people together when things get tough.
John, you understand that you created a bunch of quotable tweets in this episode, right? I love this metaphor, and one thing that I'm thinking of right now, I just want you to reflect and you've been in the Navy, you've been on a nuclear submarine in the Cold War, you are an entrepreneur. Which one of those do you find to be more challenging?
I would say I was surprised at the challenge of being an entrepreneur. I thought that would be easier. I remember. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this story real quick. I was a very senior guy at a big company before I left and started my own business. And I went back to some of my same customers from that big business, and I showed up to one who I'd been doing business with for years. They knew me, they trusted me. At least I thought they trusted me. And I showed up with my new company, my new logo on my shirt, and asked for a meeting because I was meeting with another customer in that same town. So I show up, and as a guy I knew for years, and I said, I'd like to like to talk to you about my new business and what we're doing. And he's like, it's like, no. I said, you didn't schedule the meeting, and we don't do business with new companies. I'm like, well, it's me. Like, remember me? Like, I was just here, like, 6 months ago with another company. And so that's when I realized, like, this is going to be harder than I thought. So I think that I thought that my personality and my respect in the industry would get me a long way, but it didn't. And we had to build the brand up from the ground up. And so I think it's being an entrepreneur. Whatever plan you have, it's going to take twice as long. It's going to take twice as much money, maybe 3 times as much money. So I think that that's the thing that was probably the wake up call for me. And yeah, I mean, it's still, even 7 years in, I still, there's some days I'm like, are we going to make it? So it's just tough. It's really tough. And especially you don't have that big company backing and that cash flow from global organization, which I always had in big business. So yeah, small business is tough. You're one real big problem away from going bankrupt almost every day. It just seems like, I don't know, but
And thank you for sharing. And after all, so many years of experience and leadership, successful businesses, and so on. Thank you for sharing, because we discussed it prior to this podcast recording, how much we as a society talk about the sexiness of entrepreneurship and empower people to be entrepreneurs. Like, this is the coolest thing ever. And of course, there's a lot of benefits. I've been running my businesses for now more than 10 years, and I'm really happy. I don't think I'll ever work for somebody as such. At the same time, man, there's days that it's like, you're
yeah,
just so confused. You're like, I don't know what to do. I'm this, so it's hard, and you beat yourself up, and I think we need to talk more about it, because everybody beat themselves up. I talked to the first Bulgarian unicorn company, the CEO and founder, Christo Borisov, was at the podcast. Go check out the episode, by the way, it's great. And he said the first 4 or 5 years, it's been just insane. They wake up just to take a shower, go works early morning till 9 p.m, and they can't crack it, and he's stressed and overwhelmed and doesn't know what to do. And that's the part of the journey.
yeah,
But yet, you only see the fancy titles of the new unicorn that it's being created, and you create this twisted picture. Did you know that the probability to build a unicorn, I saw it somewhere online, it's 0.00006. That's not much. That's not
well,
much.
that's why I don't. I mean, it's interesting too, because unicorns. It's kind of interesting. I'll just say this little analogy here. Unicorns are rare, right? And when I was with big companies, I'll use a different analogy. We were chasing whales. When we were a big company, we were chasing the whales. We wanted the big company. We wanted to get big accounts, big businesses, and we wanted to land these whales, right? And one of the things I found as an entrepreneur is there is so much value in getting the little fish and not the whales. What we found in my small company is that the whales didn't really appreciate our value proposition as much as the small companies did. Small companies embrace us. They're like, oh, you guys are easy to do business with. You answer the phone the first ring. You give us a quote within 24 hours. You ship my product quickly. You're the kind of company I want to do business with. What I found with the big companies, you build a relationship and you get your product qualified, and then they throw you in a reverse auction, and it's a price only battle. And so they didn't care about your value proposition. They just wanted the lowest price. And so that's the business I was in with big business for years, chasing those whales and getting beat up on price. What I found was I could eat really, really well with a lot of fish and not one big whale. So I don't know, for entrepreneurs that are listening in and you're trying to figure out how to win in your market, don't go for the whales, go for the fish. There's a lot of them, and they'll probably appreciate your message more than the whales will.
Listen carefully, everybody. I hope you're taking notes, because there's so much good stuff in this episode. Since as you know, John, me and my co-author, we're working on our second book, which is called Perform in Times of Crisis, and it's about leadership in times of uncertainty, times of crisis. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about this. And if I'm not mistaken, the first chapter of your book was called "Run to the Fire."
Yeah.
Maybe can you share with me what does that mean in the context of being in a nuclear submarine? But how can we apply these lessons also to leadership in business?
Yeah, it's something I've really taken from my days in submarines and applied it in business for these 20 plus years. But so on a submarine at sea, one of the most dangerous things that can happen is a fire. Fire will it can explode volatile material. It can asphyxiate sailors, and so we were trained as firefighters. Every submariner is trained as a firefighter, and you're trained to run towards the fire. And the idea is put it out when it's small, so you don't damage the submarine and you have a major loss of equipment in life, right? So that's just normal practice, right? So for years, I was, we would run drills and I'd run towards the fire every time dutifully and put out the fire. And it's just what I was used to. And then when I got into corporate world, what I noticed was whenever there was a fire, so just, the equivalent would be a problem, I noticed people start backing away and start moving away from the problem, right? Because nobody wanted to be associated with the problem, right? They're all trying to manage their careers and they're trying to look good for their bosses. And so when there was a problem, people moved away from the problem and not towards the problem. And what ends up happening, and a lot of times these problems inside companies get bigger, they fester, whether it's a personnel problem, a product problem, a cash flow problem, a profitability issue, whatever. If you don't address those issues, they're not going to get better. They're going to get worse and they're going to get bigger and they're going to burn out of control and they could permanently damage your business. And so one of the things that I teach leaders is this idea of running towards problems. So if you see something that's going to adversely affect the performance of your business, don't be the person that backs away. Be the person that runs towards it and addresses it before it gets out of control. And so many business failures we've seen, I would say last 10 years especially, were companies that didn't run towards their problems. They let them fester and get out of control and burn out of control and eventually kill their businesses. So I think the idea of I'll give you one quick example is I took over a business that I thought I understood really well. And when I started digging into the books, I realized they had very high warranty costs and very high customer concession costs. And when I started asking questions why this was, it turns out that they had a product in the field that was designed to be used in indoor applications, was being applied to outdoor applications. So these parts were rusting in the field and failing. And so and this was a known problem within the organization for years, and no one had done anything about it. And so when I tried to figure out the best way forward was how do we redesign the product, it was going to be millions of dollars. And then I also discovered that even if I did the redesign, it would be obsolete within a number of years anyway. So I made the decision to shut the product line down because it had been neglected. This problem had been neglected and it's starting to burn out of control. So I had to shut the product line down, which was a major thing for the business. And I ended up having to travel around the country and apologize and create plans for all of our customers, how we'd support them going forward. But we had to kill the product line because it had a known problem that was unaddressed. And it's just a terrible situation. But so I highly recommend leaders, if you have a problem, that you run towards it, not away from it, because it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and sometimes this could be a wake-up call for many of us. Sometimes this problem does not look like a problem. Oh, I need to have this conversation with this employee, but I'm too busy. I'm just gonna, and the fire gets bigger, right? Like it's not even a fire initially, but you just leave it. And we had a guest on the podcast, Boris Krostiv, the founder CEO of Remote More, and he shared he's a little bit obsessed, but in a good way. He has a spreadsheet and he's constantly having a big list of all the potential problems and risk and failure points, like 50 or 60 or something. He kind of estimates the impact and the probability and trying to address. Maybe it's a little bit too much for some of us, right, to do that on a weekly basis. But at the same time, is it, right? Could it be that this could prevent so many challenges and problems and keep you sane, right?
Yeah.
And the last thing before we finish this episode that I want you to elaborate on is one of your chapters is called "Develop a No Escape Mindset."
Yeah.
So I'd like to finish on that one.
Yeah. So one of the things that's interesting when you deployed on a submarine, you left with 155 crew. They lock the doors and you go out to sea for, we would typically go 100 days, so 3 months at sea. And so a no escape mindset is to deal with the issues as you have presented to you and don't try to run away from them. So a lot of cases we might have an employee that's not working out, and so we want a lot of times we'll just fire them. Yeah, let's get rid of them, start over again. And on a submarine at sea with the hatches shut, you're not going to fire anybody. You're stuck with the sailors you're deployed with, which means you got to work things out and you got to figure out how can I get the best out of the team I have. And so I tell the story in the book in that chapter about one sailor who was my worst performing sailor, and he was a problem. And he ended up becoming my best sailor because it just took me a while to understand what made him tick and how to challenge him to the where he was, you know, his situation. Every time he got bored, he'd get in trouble. So trying to keep him from being bored and make sure that he was completely engaged. And he ended up becoming my best sailor. And I think that we often try to escape our problems. Like you might have a conflict with a colleague, and maybe in a big company you could disappear and maybe never see that person. Avoid them in the hallway, avoid their calls. But in a submarine at sea, in those tight quarters, if you had a conflict with someone, you got to work it out because you're never getting away from them in these tight. You're going to bump into them, I guarantee it. So I think it taught me to work my issues out, resolve issues, and then find a way to move forward and not keep these items festering. So it's the idea of embracing the challenges you have in front of you and not trying to run away from it. So we couldn't run away from our problems. We couldn't run away from our conflicts at sea. I think it works well in business to address your conflicts head on.
John, thank you so much. What a great way to finish the day. And before we kind of wrap up, I would like, first of all, to thank you and give you credit for anything you do, all the fantastic leadership material and content that you're putting out there, your books. I listened to that one. Everybody needs to get a copy. All in the same boat. This is the Audible version. You can also get it as paper. There's a couple more books. You got to sign up and subscribe to Deep Leadership Podcast with Jon Rennie. Jon, thank you so much. Just to wrap it up, where could people find you? How can you support leaders and organizations on their journey?
Yeah, everything is at jonsrennie.com, and you can have links in there to my socials. There's links to the podcast. My books are there, and I do articles, blog articles, and what have you. So yeah, it's a great place to go and learn a lot about leadership. What's interesting is that we live in a time where there's a lot of great information that's out there and it's free. So these podcasts, like this podcast, I highly recommend you subscribe and share because again, it's free and it's a great place to learn. And our podcast, Deep Leadership, same thing. It's free. I call it Dashboard University. Put it on while you're driving to work every day, and you're going to learn from these great leaders that have gone before you. And that's what I try to do is feature guests that have been there, done that, and we learn the lessons from those leaders to how we can be better leaders.
This is why we do it, guys, because we want on the weekly basis to get nurtured and enriched by all these leaders, and hopefully, you guys are also getting value out of it. Thank you once again, Jon. Thanks everybody for being with us. Subscribe to the episode if you enjoyed the episode. Subscribe to the podcast. Check out Jon's podcast. Let us know what you think. We're very reachable on LinkedIn, and have an amazing day. #keep performing. Ciao.